That is correct. I just started the recording.
Perfect. Okay, Megan.
And you guys
Okay.
can see in the participants list as people come in, we're up to 74 participants now, and it keeps going up.
Oh, okay. So you'll tell us when you think they're all here?
I can do that. We're up to 100, 104.
All right, I'll wait a couple seconds before to get started.
Sounds good. All right, we seem to be pretty stable at about 119. So I think you're good to go.
Okay, good evening, Moorestown community. Welcome to the Moorestown Board of Education Candidate Forum. On behalf of Moorestown Home and School, I would like to thank the candidates and the public for attending, and thank you to More Unity for moderating. I would also like to extend a special thank you to Jeffrey Airy of Moorestown Public Schools for providing the tech support for this Zoom call. My name is Megan Del Calo. I'm the president of Home and School. Home and School prides itself on bringing quality programs just like this one to you tonight. We cannot do this without your support. Please consider joining Home and School so that we can continue to support our students and our schools. And now I would like to introduce Karen Reiner from More Unity, who will be leading the team that is moderating the forum tonight. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you so much, Megan. Thank you so much for inviting us to organize and moderate the BOE Candidate Forum again this year. More Unity is a local civic group that believes we're stronger as a community when we learn from one another's perspectives, life experiences, and opinions. Tonight, all of you who've dialed in will have an opportunity to meet the 6 candidates who are vying for 3 positions on the Moorestown Board of Education. I'm going to have them each kind of wave to you for a minute. So candidates, when I call your name, please give a wave, and you get an opportunity to introduce yourself in just a minute. Mrs. Melissa Arcaro Burns. Mrs. Jill Fallows Macaluso. Mr. Joe Horwitz. Mrs. Cheryl Makopoulos. Mrs. Billy Danielle Thomas. Mr. David Bustigan. Okay, thanks. We are grateful to and have deep respect for these folks who are demonstrating their commitment to excellence in our schools and our community by running for the Board of Ed. Thank you all. It takes a lot of time, energy, effort, and courage to put your necks on the line like this. So we are very grateful. I want to share with the voters a little bit of the format for the night so they know what to expect, and so they can also understand how we got where we are in terms of our process. So we're going to start in just a minute by having each candidate give a 2-minute introduction of themselves. And for that, we'll be going in alphabetical order by last name. Then we're going to begin asking some of the questions that were emailed in advance. We had asked people to submit questions by October 12th. And we received 109 questions. And in a minute, I'll address how we dealt with all those questions. So the candidates will each have 1 minute to respond to those questions. And we drew names from a hat right before we joined the call. And Cheryl Makopoulos is going to be taking the first question. And then we will rotate alphabetically from her. And then the second question will go to Billy Danielle Thomas first, and so on. So each person will have an opportunity to be the first person to answer, the middle person to answer, the last person to answer, etc. We're going to be timing the responses to keep everything on schedule. We respect all of your time as well. So they'll get a yellow warning like this when they have about 10 seconds left to speak, and they'll get a red warning like this when their time is up. And I've told them that I'm not going to just cut their mics off if they overrun by a second or two, but we are asking them by the time they see the red paper to finish their sentence and finish their thought. Let's see, what else do we want to share with you? Once we've done this, that's going to take us to about 8 p.m., going through the intros and the pre-submitted questions. And around that time, we're going to open up the chat feature in Zoom so that those of you who are out there in the netherworld, if you want to submit a question live, you'll be able to. We ask that you submit questions that are courteous, to the point, applicable to all candidates, and not repetitive of something that we've already covered. If possible, start your question with a 1 or 2 word summary of what the topic is. So for example, if your question's about taxes, start with the word taxes and then pose your question. A little after 8:15, each candidate's going to be given time to make closing comments, and then we'll wrap up for the night. The goal is to finish the program by about 8:30 p.m. So to stay on schedule, as I mentioned, we'll ask the candidates to respect the timeline. We ask that all of you, when you get a chance to pose live questions via the chat, that you keep those questions to the point. Okay, now, in terms of how we pulled the event together tonight, please note that the Board of Ed is a nonpartisan organization. But we know that people are often suspicious of who's organizing these things, and are they biased, and are they going to throw their weight towards one candidate? So we've tried very, very hard to be as fair and balanced as we can. And as part of that, doing that, to avoid any perception of bias or conflict of interest, we ensured that the volunteers who review the questions and who are asking the questions tonight represent a cross-section of voters. In other words, we have one Democrat, we have one Republican, and we have one independent on our team. We will be taking turns asking the questions tonight, and we're doing our absolute best to run a fair and balanced event. So to quickly describe the process before we meet the candidates, as I mentioned, we received 109 questions by the October 12th deadline, and we had a few more trickle in since then. What we did as a team was we sorted the questions by theme, and based upon the frequency with which certain categories appeared, we identified the most popular topics. And then we gleaned a question from each of those topics. In some cases, there were similar questions that we merged together into one. So if you posed a question and what we read doesn't sound exactly like what you posed, it may be that it's a hybrid of your question and someone else's, in an effort to cover as many voters' concerns as possible. The candidates will be receiving a copy of all the questions that were submitted, so that even though we'll only get to 6 of 109, they'll know what all of your concerns are. And most of the folks who submitted them requested to remain anonymous. Those of you who didn't, I will share your email address with the candidates. And if they're able to and want to, they might reach out to you personally. All right, now we're going to finally meet the candidates. And we'll be doing that in alphabetical order. And then, as I mentioned, when we start asking the questions, by luck of the draw, Mrs. Makopoulos will take the first question. So for alphabetical order, we'll be starting with Mrs. Burns. I just want to tee up my timer before you go. And we've asked the candidates to talk with you about their qualifications as they introduce themselves. For anyone on the call who is not speaking, we ask that you mute yourself so that there's no interference from a dog barking or anything else. And we're going to tee up Mrs. Burns, and you have 2 minutes to introduce yourself.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Melissa Arcaro Burns, and I am running for the Board of Education because after nearly 6 years of working with home and school in senior roles and regularly attending BOE meetings, I believe I can best serve our students and community by taking my skills, experience, and passion from the audience to the board. Many people know me from my work in home and school. However, I am also in-house counsel for a large technology company where I'm responsible for negotiating multi-million-dollar contracts. Prior to that, I practiced matrimonial law at a boutique law firm. The skills I've gained in these 2 roles leave me well equipped to deal with our upcoming contract negotiations. I'm also trained as a scientist and worked as a medical researcher for several years prior to attending law school. I will use data and facts to keep our kids safe and in school. I have 3 children. Grace graduated from Moorestown in 2021 and is attending Rutgers University. She is my hardworking on-level student. Daniel's in 4th grade, and he has both educational and medical special needs. Brady is my 3rd grader. He's a history buff and he loves learning. Having 3 kids with very different learning styles and needs allows me to see firsthand how our schools serve our children regardless of where they are in their educational journey. I am committed to making sure that our district can meet the needs of all students at all levels. In addition to my work with home and school, I have served on the planning board since 2019, as the liaison to EDAC, and as the executive board member of the Special Education Advisory Council. In all of these groups, I work with people who have different points of view, and we always find middle ground. I do all of this because I care deeply about our community, our school district, and all of our stakeholders. If elected, I will bring the same level of commitment and dedication to the board. I want to take a second to thank Home and School for supporting this event and for More Unity for facilitating it.
Okay, that was perfect timing. All right, thank you. And next in line is Mrs. Jill Fallows Macaluso.
Good evening, everyone. I'm mom to 3 daughters in the district at the high school WAMs and the UES. I've been involved with the community since moving to Moorestown about 13 years ago, serving many years as room parent, home and school committee chair, coaching field hockey, and leading several Girl Scout troops. My close involvement with the school board began in the beginning of this year when I advocated on behalf of the community for a clear plan to safely increase in-person learning, and I've attended every board meeting since. COVID really shined a light on systemic opportunity areas for our district, and it's my belief that we need to be more proactive, transparent, and inclusive. I know that being a board member takes a lot of work and time, and I'm ready, willing, and able to serve. And most importantly, I'm capable. I'm trained as a nurse at Penn, received my law degree from Rutgers, and currently serve as an executive for a $20 billion global healthcare company in the role of Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer, which is all about technical compliance with the laws and regulations, but also about that taller order of doing the right thing. I personally manage a $20 million budget. I have extensive experience with board governance as I report into the board of directors for my company, kind of given the unique role that I sit in. I have expertise in contract negotiation, having worked as a corporate attorney for a decade at a top New Jersey law firm. And I also am skilled at setting policies. And with COVID still a bit front and center, I should mention that I have 10 years of experience in FDA and clinical trial law, working closely with government agencies at the federal and state level. I'm strategic. I think big. I love to challenge the status quo. I have a personal passion for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I like to even add belonging. I am an inclusive team player, a good listener who works well with others, and I care deeply about our children, and I want to ensure that our interests are at the center of all decisions. I'm really excited about this opportunity to serve on the Board of Education, and I promise to bring my passion, my energy, and my enthusiasm to represent the community's interests.
Thank you. All right, Joe Horwitz.
Good evening, and thank you for coming to meet with us tonight and learn more about us this evening. I myself won't pull the lever unless I know more about who I'm voting for. Thank you, Home and School, More Unity, and Jeff Ari's Tech Savviness, and everyone who helped make this possible. I've lived here in Moorestown since 2004 when we were voted America's #1 place to live, before meeting my wife, Hope, and having our daughters, Sari, who's a 5th grader at the UES, and Jacqueline, who's a senior at Roberts Elementary in 3rd grade. Our community's value on education was that important to me back then as it is for all of us today. I grew up in a depressed community where the focus wasn't necessarily on education for everyone. I learned to appreciate education as I began my post-secondary career, feeling far, far behind many of my peers. Having held a job since I was 10 years old, delivering newspapers at 5 a.m., being behind was never an issue to my work ethic or desire to succeed. And I further grew my appreciation of primary education from a family filled with teachers, administrators, from special education and librarians to language arts. Since graduating college, I've worked as an accountant in Fortune 500 companies, been a financial planner to businesses and families like yourselves, and over the past 10 years have managed all aspects of multi-million-dollar healthcare businesses. The past 19 months, I've had to successfully navigate those healthcare and regulatory waters through a pandemic where safety of my patients and profits for my investors had to be successful on all ends. Much like a board, it takes a team effort to get there. I've attended Board of Ed meetings and met with Board of Ed members from as far back as the 80s through today. And serving on a committee is nothing new for me. I've served on many committees, from nonprofits, business associations, and political action committees affiliated with my businesses. Being on a committee is realizing that I'm only one of 9 votes and I've got to work selflessly with everyone. And somewhere in this pandemic, we went from we to me, and it serves no place on this board. and I will ensure that I will do best for all of the children of all of our families in our district equally.
Thank you. All right, Cheryl Makopoulos.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm Cheryl Makopoulos. I appreciate More Unity in Home and School for the opportunity. Growing up, education was a top priority in my house. My mom graduated from a vocational high school, and my dad was a public educator in New Jersey who retired as a superintendent. My parents were divorced, but they were always unified about my education, despite their different paths. My husband and John and I decided to move to Moorestown 14 years ago. We could have gone anywhere, but we fell in love with Moorestown. The great school system and small town charm are perfect to raise our family. In our early years, I became a board trustee of the community house, and I was honored to play a significant role in restoring this meaningful icon of our town. I really learned through that experience how special Moorestown is. Our boys, Evan and Alex, began their education as Baker Bears, and I was a proud room mom several times. Now they're in 8th and 7th grade, and they only want me when they forget lunch. There are so many great things about our schools. There's amazing educators, involved families and caregivers, active advocacy organizations, great athletic programs, and varied curriculum. I've personally appreciated how the district not only focuses on academics, but also the arts. One of my boys loves art and the other loves math. I see how the ability to do things they love within the context of their day gives them confidence in other disciplines. And that is something I believe every child in Moorestown deserves. When the referendum was introduced, I started attending the Board of Education meetings regularly. I saw the direct impact the board had on our children's education, and I've been active ever since. I'm a measured, objective thinker who communicates effectively. I've managed multi-million-dollar budgets and led high-performing teams. In my current role as VP of Corporate Marketing, it's my role to assess the environment, understand key stakeholders' needs, and lead the team to goals and objectives and make sure they accomplish them. I feel these skills will translate well as a BOE member when communicating and aligning all stakeholders within the district. Thank you, and I look forward to sharing more with you in this hour.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Mrs. Billy Danielle Thomas.
Good evening. Thank you, viewers, for your time, and a special acknowledgement to More Unity and the Moorestown Home and School Association for hosting and moderating this forum. I'll now take a few minutes to provide a bit about myself. I'm a 30-year resident of Moorestown. My husband, Deputy Fire Chief Rudy Thomas, and I are the proud parents of 5 amazing children, 3 of whom attended Moorestown schools K through 12 and graduated in 2008, 2019, and 2020 respectively. I was a member of the Home and School Association while my children were in school and attended board meetings periodically, but regularly upon deciding to run. I am a member of the Low and Moderate Income Housing Committee and an active member of my church, where I serve as a ministry leader and mentor. I possess a Bachelor of Science degree in psychology and a Master of Arts degree in early childhood and elementary education. Professionally, I am a career-long educator, the daughter of 2 amazing educators, with a broad range of experiences from being an early childhood teacher to program evaluator and monitor, policy development and program administration. Currently, I'm the Director of Special Projects with the Gloucester County Special Services School District, where I oversee the operation of 2 federal programs with a multi-million-dollar budget, which was a promotional opportunity which I accepted after almost 20 years with the New Jersey Department of Education. Of all that I've mentioned, however, I am most proud of the fact that I am an advocate for children and am committed to ensuring that each child receive a high-quality, world-class global education and is prepared to be successful in college, career, or entrepreneurial endeavors. Thank you.
Okay, and last but not least, we'll hear from Mr. David Bustigan. David, you need to unmute, sorry.
Sorry, that was a good start. Can everyone hear me now? So I want to thank More Unity as well, just like everybody else has, for organizing this. For that. I too have been in this community for a very long time, 40 plus years. I've been a resident of Moorestown. When we moved here, I've been a Baker Bear. I went to Moorestown Middle School, Moorestown High School. 18 of my cousins, 8 of my nieces and nephews, and all 3 of my daughters are products of this incredible school district. Very proud of my daughters who experience every single level of accommodation that this school district provides. One of them requiring an IEP, and was able to have assets available to her to help her on the path to success. And seeing all that, I became involved with getting involved in the board meetings about a year and a half ago, when I had our youngest one, little Gia, who's just turned 10 and is a 4th grader at the UES. And the more children you have and the more that go through the school district, the more I think you want to get involved. I built up a family business here with my father and brother, Quickie Manufacturing. We turned that into a $250 million company where I was the head of I was executive vice president of sales and marketing. We sold that company. I now manage national accounts for SodaStream, a $350 million company. I bring up my corporate background because I think that the team building and the involvement that you have to have with your coworkers and other partners, customers and coworkers alike, takes building a coalition and finding common ground to find solutions to things. So I'll bring that to the forefront if I'm able to gain a seat on the board. So that is my story.
I am really impressed with everybody's ability to manage 2 minutes worth of time. Fantastic. All right. So we're going to be moving into the question portion of the event. And as a reminder, for the questions, each candidate will have 1 minute to answer. So it's going to be a little bit more challenging to manage your time. And Jonathan Leith, I will be introducing. He will be asking the first question. And because of the pulling the names from the hat, the first question goes to Cheryl Makopoulos. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you to all the candidates for such a great school district. Now comes the fun part. So the first question is going to go to Ms. Cheryl Makopoulos, and here is the question. What is the biggest challenges our district will face over the next several years, and how are you uniquely qualified to address them? What diversity of thought do you bring to the Board of Education?
Okay, let me try to remember. That's a couple different layers. In terms of the biggest challenges over the next couple of years, I think honestly, where I sit right now, the biggest challenge that I see is the need for visionary leadership and clearly defined measurable objectives. Leadership, meaning a new superintendent, everything that person brings to the board and helps with us defining clear objectives affects everything we do. It affects how we address the education and needs of every student population. It addresses how we invest our budget. It addresses how we motivate and develop our teachers. And it addresses how we align on our district goals going forward. So in my mind, leadership is the biggest challenge that we have right now that's going to lead us into the future for potential issues coming down the road. I also think that this really is the timing that's right, to work with the board and a new superintendent to refine our objectives in a way that the results can be measured and we can feel confident that it's benefiting all of our children.
Thank you. Thank you. Great question. Great answer. The next person, Billy Danielle Thomas, same question. What is the biggest challenges our district will face over the next several years, and how are you uniquely qualified to address them? And what diversity of thought do you bring to the Board of Education?
Thank you. I would say that over the next several years that the district will still be required to look at the far-reaching implications of the COVID pandemic and recovering from those. We know that there were individual groups of students that were more severely impacted by the COVID pandemic. And one of the things that the district will be required to do is make certain that those individuals that were negatively impacted would have the opportunity to be brought back up to speed in terms of ensuring that any learning loss that took place is addressed, and also looking at the movement towards creating an environment where the experience gap is less prevalent. We know that while there are close to 4,000 students in this district, that not all students within the district are achieving at the same rate. And therefore, there needs to be a strategic and methodical look at how to ensure that all students have the opportunity to meet with success.
Thank you. Thank you. Next question, same question to David Bustigan.
Sure. I think and this year alone was probably one of the most challenging years. So if it's going to be more challenging, that's going to be something else. But I think that the bigger challenge that we're all faced with, to me, is transparency, that continue. I think one of the things that got me to jump into the fray were the surveys that were going around and the voices of the parents and families coming back to the board. And then what was being done with those responses from the community at large was something that is going to continue to happen and there needs to be more of it. And we need to be fully transparent with what the community is saying as a whole. I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges. What I think uniquely qualifies me of that as far as diversity of thought is that I don't want my one voice out of a 9-board member school board to make a decision for 5,000 people. I think there needs to be all voices weighing in equally to make decisions that are going to affect our children and our schools.
Thank you. Thank you, David. All right, Melissa Burns, I'll repeat the question for you. What's the biggest challenges our district will face over the next several years, and how are you uniquely qualified to address them? And what diversity of thought do you bring to the board?
I think there are so many issues, honestly. The new super, the contract negotiations coming up, that affects us for 3 years. I think every issue around COVID, not just about bringing our kids back up, so to speak, academically, but also the social and emotional needs of those children, managing our budget and hopefully getting us to a point where it becomes an easier thing for us to do. If that's possible. A big thing for me would be getting us back to a place of civility and working together. I feel like that is the cornerstone of what makes all of this work. And I do think that I'm uniquely qualified for that, given that I've been a family law attorney and a corporate attorney. I bring all sorts of people with crazy emotions to the table, and we come to resolutions and we do it respectfully.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. The next question or the person is Jill Fallows Macaluso. Same question.
Yep, those are all great answers. And when I think about diversity, I just think about the world changing. The world is changing so much, and our children learning in today's world, it needs to also change. We're going to need to leverage new technologies, adapt the way that children are, learning and what they're learning from a curriculum standpoint. And when I think about what I can bring to the table as far as diversity of thought and experiences, I don't have a background in education, but I actually think that's not what we need to take the current Board of Education from good to great. I bring an executive level business leaders, experiences and capabilities that I mentioned. And the power of diverse teams is having complementary skill sets and capabilities. Facts and data show that diverse teams are stronger and they outperform other teams. They're more creative, they're more innovative, they're more successful. And so I believe that my diversity of thought and experiences would complement the existing Board of Education and help us meet all of the challenges that face our children's education.
Thank you. And finally, Joe Horwitz, you will end the round answering that same question.
Yes, I think one of the most important things is having strong leadership. We're burning through superintendents, and let's face it, people don't quit because they hate their job. They quit because they hate their boss. So we really need to build some strong accountability and hire the right person in, or we'll be getting the lowest common denominator that'll lower our property values. We need to hold that superintendent accountable. Every time we go through one, we have someone that keeps the boat afloat for a year, and then someone that comes in for a year and plants their roots. It builds cynicism with our teachers, and the teachers are the one that are educating our kids. And the way that I get effective outcomes for the accountability of the patients that I have in my community, I treat my nurses right, my caregivers right. And I see that come through in the patient-centered care. And it's something that's been effective for me again and again and again, for that we can see come through for our students and helping them thrive. There is a disparity of education, not just with the kids from COVID, but also for other races and minorities as well. And we need to be staring at the numbers effectively and making sure that everyone thrives successfully.
All right. Great job on this first round of questions. You all did excellent. All right, round number 2. This first question will go to Ms. Billy Danielle Thomas. We know that many students struggled with remote learning at the start of the pandemic. If it's determined that there was a learning lapse, what do you recommend to close that gap? And what would you suggest we do if COVID or another disease takes a bad turn in the future?
I believe that there does need to be an assessment of exactly what transpired, what the extent of learning loss was as a result of COVID. We know that with our students having spent a portion of the year out of school, that there was undoubtedly learning loss. All of the research indicates that despite the accessibility to mobile technology and remote learning, that nothing really replaces in-person learning. So I think that once there is an assessment of exactly where the losses took place, there does need to be the opportunity to offer supplemental instructional and support services. I think that Joe mentioned that there was also some loss in the area of social and emotional learning, which we also know to be a critical component of our students' developmental growth. So once we identify those things, we do need to make certain that there are adequate supports that are put into place to bring students back to speed.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. I'll repeat the question for David Vosbekian. We know that many students struggle with remote learning at the start of the pandemic. And if it's determined that there was a learning lapse, what do you recommend to close the gap? And what would you suggest we do if COVID or another disease takes a bad turn in the future?
Well, I agree with what the other voices have said here about the assessment and seeing exactly what the effect, what the gap has been on kids. And I think the key to that is making sure that all the families are aware and we are communicating to them the resources that are made available to them. I think many of which a lot of families might not know about that are afforded to them. I just found out about extended daycare, maybe because there's such a gap between my second child and my third, I had forgotten about extended daycare and what a nice asset that was to, it's called extended daycare, but it's extended learning. They're doing activities and homework and classwork in that extended daycare. So it's things like that that everyone needs to be aware of, that are resources available to them and their child to help them bridge those gaps. And as far as something taking a bad turn, we'll have to take those steps as we see them hit us, because we're not going to know until it does come upon us. But I think we'll be better prepared, certainly this time, having gone through what we went through over the last year and a half.
All right, thank you. All right, the next question, the same question to Melissa Carol Burns.
In all honesty, I'm not an educator, and although I absolutely agree with assessments and really figuring out the very best way that we can determine who needs help and how they need help and what things will help them, I have to leave that to the administrators, and I have to leave that to the teachers to advise. And I think that they are our best resource for that. But in terms of support that I would give to any kind of program that helps with that COVID slide, so to speak, I would absolutely be supportive of that. And as Mr. Bustigan said, I think it's incredibly difficult for us to predict what would happen next. I don't think any of us would have ever imagined this would have happened now. But I like to think that we could take some lessons from what we learned here and pass them along in the event it does happen again.
All right, thank you. All right, I'll repeat the question again. This will be for Jill Fallows Macaluso. We know many students struggle with remote learning at the start of the pandemic. If it's determined that there was a learning lapse, what do you recommend to close the gap, and what would you suggest we do if COVID or another disease takes a bad turn in the future?
Yeah, the governor actually talked about this today, and he spoke to the fact that there has in fact been a learning loss and also an impact on mental health of our students. So I also think it's important to assess this both in the entire population as well as specifically tailored to individual students. And I think it's incumbent on the school to provide the top-down support and additional resources for all students to close that learning loss gap, and then also to tailor individualized support to particular students or groups of students that meet their needs, the additional support, et cetera. And I'd be hopeful that we could perhaps consider using some of the COVID grant funding that we got to offer this additional support, not just on learning loss, but on mental health. And as far as planning for another pandemic in the future, I think it's really important that we're proactive now and that we can prop up the appropriate remote learning environment should we actually need to go virtual. So I think it would be incumbent on the board to set the clear strategy and direction for the administration to be prepared in the event that another pandemic strikes us, so that remote learning would be seamless and we would experience a minimized impact on learning loss.
Thank you. Thank you. Joseph Horowitz.
So we've said it already, we're going to have to rely on our teachers. They are the experts. They're most intimate with our children and where they are in their learning stages right now. It takes a whole family and a partnership with parents, and they're going to have to be involved as well. And that communication has to be really effective of what we can do. It's the one question every time I ask when I talk to our teachers is, what can we do better at home? We had 2 stories in our house. One of my daughters did really well remote and the other one not so hot. So it is different for everyone, impacts people differently, and that's where the teachers are most important. What we would do next time, well, we wouldn't go to a dentist for open heart surgery, even though they're still a doctor. And it still comes back to relying on the experts and listening how they're going to guide us, as we're going to have to be flexible. And that was something that was bothersome last year watching board meetings. Was it seemed like there was so much inflexibility in our community when we just didn't know what was coming next. And it is going to be an ask for everyone the next time as we work together to get through it.
Thank you. Ending this second round, question goes to Cheryl Markopoulos. Same question.
Thank you, Jonathan. Well, let's hope this doesn't happen again, but I do just want to acknowledge that I know the pandemic was hard on all of us. And I personally felt that our teachers did a fantastic job working twice as hard for half the amount of time in front of students in person. I feel at this point that we really need to start where we are. We don't have baseline metrics from the optional standard testing from last year. So I think if we can develop some objective measures based on triangulating the sources we have now, including MAP, New Jersey Starts Strong, and then assessments that the teachers do in the classroom, that would at least give us a really good measure of where there was loss, how the achievement gap was widened, and what we need to do. In terms of planning for the future, I think we need to potentially increase our technology investment to make sure that we are prepared to meet those kids where they are, and also prioritize students who need it most within special needs and other populations to be in school. Thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone. We appreciate your responses. Now I will turn it over to Rochelle Rabineau, and she'll go with the additional questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. Okay. We received quite a few questions about contract negotiation. So that will be the question that I will be asking, and we'll be starting the answers with Mr. David Bustigan. The question I'm going to ask is, what strategy would you recommend to ensure a balanced and fair negotiation between the board and teachers union while being sensitive to the needs of students, parents, and taxpayers? And Mr. Bustigan, we're going to start with you.
Okay. Well, I think the first thing you have to look at is the budget of 80 million, the initial budget, and where that 80 million is being spent, and what the results of that spending have been, and in what different areas. Having not been privy to exactly where all those pennies and dollars are going to, it's hard for me to fully assess how to negotiate as a go-between between the unions and the board. However, again, running a business in that kind of background, you have to sit back and assess something and say, okay, look, this is our business. In this case, it's a budget. What's working and what's not working. And all throughout my business career, never was I the one voice that said, that's it, this is the way we're going to do it. We had to all agree collectively, and there were many different opinions on where money was best spent. And not everybody agreed, but you just have to work those things through. But it's got to be results based on prior years. How was that money spent, and what were the results of those expenditures, and where do we cut back and where do we spend more? It just has to be results based.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Next, we'll move on to Mrs. Burns. I'll repeat the question again. What strategy would you recommend to ensure a fair and balanced negotiation between the board and the teachers union while being sensitive to the needs of the students, students, parents, and taxpayers?
So what strategy? That's a very interesting question. I think that we need to make sure that the people from the board that are negotiating the contract are a good representation of the board, some that have been on the board for a while, some that are new to the board possibly. I would not necessarily discourage the use of a professional to assist if the board felt that that was necessary. But I think that in the negotiation itself, we have to really keep reminding ourselves that these are our teachers. These are the people that are with our students all day. And they're not just the teachers, of course, paraprofessionals, custodians, and secretaries. And I think we need to remember that we have to do what is the very best thing we can do for our kids and our employees.
Thank you. Next, we'll move on to Mrs. Macaluso. What strategy would you recommend to ensure a balanced and fair negotiation between the board and teachers union while being sensitive to the needs of the students, the parents, and the taxpayers?
Yep. Yeah. So first, I'll just say that I have extensive contract negotiation experience and extensive experience in budget management. And I think that those are two important capabilities when you'd approach this negotiation. I think it would be very important at the outset to understand the needs of all of the stakeholders and to set the negotiation period up to be a positive and productive and healthy environment. I know some examples from the past that I've heard of as it's become somewhat strained, for example, teachers not writing recommendation letters during the negotiation process. And I would never want to see it come to that. We're all in this together to come to the best outcome for our students and to respect and meet the needs of all of our stakeholders, including the amazing teachers that we have. So I think setting it up for success would be having an awesome team with a positive attitude and to engage in very healthy and productive negotiations, making sure that the folks on the team had the skills and capabilities that I mentioned that I have, like significant contract negotiation experience and significant budget management experience.
Great, thank you so much. Mr. Horowitz, we'll have you answer this question. And again, I'll repeat it. What strategy would you recommend to ensure a fair and balanced negotiation between the board and teachers union while being sensitive to the needs of the students, the taxpayers, and the parents?
Yeah, we're going to have an even hand for everybody. True negotiation, we're probably all going to feel a little deflated when we come away, and that's how we know that we've gotten to a good spot. But to retain good talent and make sure that we have those outcomes coming through for our children, and we'll see it in the results, is that we are fair with them, because if our teachers are happy, it is going to come through with our children and help make them good global citizens. So I would really say that we are going to be a tough spot right now because we've got hyperinflation going on and it is a tough labor market. So we are really going to have to focus, because all of us also have to go home as we have budgets and report to our spouses and loved ones that, what is going to be our outlay out of our pockets that we're all going to have to account for. So it's not just for individuals in the community, but for all of us as well representing. And I think as long as we don't make it too personal and realize that we still have to have a relationship with our teachers when we walk away, that's going to be very important as well to the contract negotiation.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, the next person, Mrs. Makopoulos, will ask you the same question. What strategy would you recommend for a fair and balanced negotiation between the board and the teachers union while being sensitive to the needs of the students, the parents, and the taxpayers?
Thank you, Rochelle. I agree with Mr. Horowitz that every negotiation is a balance of what both sides want. And I think that it's really important to engage all of the stakeholders early. The community who will be paying the bill, I think they need to understand, we need to understand as a negotiating team what they're willing to give and what they're going to get for that. We need to understand what the teachers want. We need to understand what they think has been fair and what they want more of. We need to understand how this all will roll up and affect our children. So I think that it's really important to make sure everybody has a voice in the process from the beginning and feels heard. And I think it's also important to look at potentially what's happened in the past. I have no history other than anything I've heard. So I want to know firsthand how negotiations have gone in the past and potentially look at other districts that are in the same district factor grouping and see if we can come up with, be creative and have other ideas too when all needs aren't being met.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
And finally, we'll have Mrs. Thomas answer this question. What strategy would you recommend to ensure a fair and balanced negotiation between the school board and the teachers union while being sensitive to the needs of the students, the parents, and taxpayers?
Ultimately, I feel that the contract negotiation should succinctly outline the expectations to be implemented on all sides. We know that there is the requirement that they're adhered to, and the goal is to strike a balance with the bargaining unit looking for positives on both sides and in every area, while achieving a fair and equitable contract. There should be an emphasis placed on treating as a partnership to ensure our first beneficiaries are children, and also ensure that the district's goals and objectives are met while considering the needs of the teachers and taxpayers. It's certainly the responsibility of the bargaining unit and the contract negotiators to ensure that all sides are considered and that there is a strike in balance for all involved.
Great, thank you. Thank you everyone for answering that question. I'm going to ask now the fourth question. This question we will start off with Mrs. Burns answering that to start. This question involves diversity. In what ways can we strengthen the ways that we teach students from diverse cultures, abilities, ethnicities, etc., so that we retain our high academic rigor while connecting with all of the students? And we'll start with you, Mrs. Burns.
Thank you. I think the board is making a lot of progress with the Race and Racism Committee and the things like the Truth Talk video that they presented last year to the high school students. I think it's really important for other students and parents to hear from especially students of color about their experiences in the district. I think we need to look at hiring practices. How are we recruiting? Where are we recruiting from? And ensuring that we're not doing anything to discourage diverse hiring. I certainly think that we need to look at the gap in academic performance, and first we need to understand why that exists at all. It's not a separate category, but in addition to that, for me, is the whole idea of inclusion as it applies really to special education students. And I don't believe it's a class or an accommodation. It is really a philosophy. It's about giving equal access and voice to those who have typically been isolated or separated. And the National Inclusion Project says it best. It's about intentionally planning for the success of all students.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Next, I will ask this question of Mrs. Macalusa. In what areas can we strengthen the ways that we teach students from diverse cultures, abilities, ethnicities, so that we retain our high academic rigor while connecting with all of the students?
Yep. And it's definitely about diversity and inclusion. And diversity is the demographic data that you just mentioned. And our demographics are changing. We are becoming more diverse, and that's a great thing. And we need to create an environment in the schools where all students, including diverse students, embrace diversity as opposed to just tolerating it, to create a space where everyone feels comfortable in the four walls of the school and in the community. And using Melissa's word, they feel included. And that creates the optimal learning environment for students, all students, including diverse students. And I like to think about it as, in order to feel included and feel like you belong, you need to feel safe. And in order to feel safe, the school may need to pull some culture levers and implement some tactics that help students feel more safe and comfortable and as if they belong. It could include professional education for teachers, learning how to foster safe and inclusive environment in their classroom so that all students feel comfortable learning, including diverse students in minority groups.
Great, thank you so much. Mr. Horowitz, will have you answer this question. In what areas can we strengthen the ways that we teach students from diverse cultures, abilities, and ethnicities so that we retain our high academic rigor while connecting with all of the students?
So I've had a slightly different background, but still relating to hate. I've experienced many acts of anti-Semitism from as young as when I was 7 and 8 years old. It does have an impact on you socially and emotionally. And we are supposed to be fostering a safe environment, like Ms. Macaluso said. Right now, we have 2 organizations, MAID and Murray, and sadly, an Instagram account that's reporting racist acts in our community. And I think we need to be listening to those organizations. I read a good book a few years back called A Complaint is a Gift, and you can't fix what you don't know. And we have organizations right now that are very thoughtfully telling us that we have a problem that needs to be addressed, and we need to take steps and actions to make everybody feel included. And much like Ms. Burns said, we are noticing gaps in education and do have to focus on our hiring practices, and we can look at the numbers and see that. But we have a significant problem that we need to start working on.
Okay, great, thank you. Mrs. Makopoulos, I'm going to ask you the same question. In what areas can we strengthen the ways that we teach students from diverse cultures, abilities, and ethnicities so that we retain our high academic rigor while connecting with all the students?
Thank you. There's a couple things. I think hiring practices with teachers, trying to get in more diverse teachers that reflect the different populations, African American, Asian American, Hispanic Americans in our school is very important. I think the curriculum needs to reflect the achievements of lots of different populations, and we need to make sure that we are addressing that in all of the areas where it is applicable and relevant. I also think there's opportunities outside of the classroom. I know we have a unified sports program where gen ed and special ed students get together after school for sports. I think there's opportunities to do that in other areas, like in the arts and music, those outside of the school classroom activities. Really promote belonging and get people to connect, the kids to connect better and understand each other, which I think will go a long way in the classroom. And I also think, real quickly, National Blue Ribbon Schools has a social emotional learning award that goes along with high performing schools and to close achievement gaps. So there's recently a New Jersey school that won, and it's a great model to look at.
Great, thank you so much. Next, Mrs. Thomas, will have you answer this question. In what areas can we strengthen the ways that we teach students from diverse cultures, abilities, and ethnicities to maintain our high academic rigor while connecting with all the students?
I think that in addition to much of what has already been said, that the district has to expand and maintain the dialogue with groups and organizations such as Maury, MAID, and of course Speak, who have already done significant work in identifying the needs and areas of deficit, if you will. Additionally, we have the benefit of being regionally in one of the most accessible areas to some of the most world-class institutions that we would generally have the opportunity to access much of the work that they have done in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're talking about University of Pennsylvania, Princeton, and NYU, where they have foremost scholars in the area of those things. And finally, we must be intentional and deliberate about our work towards the district's strategic plan of the aforementioned, including ensuring that the incoming superintendent must be one who will engage with the community and lead the district in moving the marker. The world is moving forward, and we don't want to be in the position of having to play catch up with what is taking place.
Okay, great, thank you so much. And we'll conclude this question. Mr. Bustigan, I'll have you answer. Again, I'll repeat, in what areas can we strengthen the ways that we teach students from diverse cultures, abilities, and ethnicities so that we maintain our high academic rigor while connecting with all the students?
They talk about exclusion and inclusion and diversity, and I think one of the major campaigns that I saw launched a year and a half ago in most schools was anti-bullying. Exclusion is like bullying. It's very similar to that. And no child should feel bullied or feel like they're not part of something or feel like they don't have access to something. That isn't the Quaker way. That isn't the way Moorestown has ever been, and we can't ever let it become that way. And that anti-bullying campaign was something that was, you saw it every single day. It was incumbent on staff and teachers and the other students and parents to all rally around that theme and make sure we were communicating to the entire student body that that type of thing would not be tolerated. And I think something very similar could be done here to make sure that we're all marching to the same beat, that there's a cadence that this community will not tolerate exclusion and that everyone has a right to access a great education at the Moorestown Public Schools.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for answering the question. Karen, I'm going to turn it over to you for the last two questions.
All right, thank you, Rochelle. And thank you, candidates. You're doing a tremendous job of sticking to the timeline. We may even wind up finishing a little bit early, which is kind of miraculous. So this next question is going to start with Mrs. Fallows Macaluso. And the question is regarding our tax bill. Over 60% of Moorstonians' tax bill goes to fund the schools. What experience do you have managing a budget? And how do you feel about tax increases going up to the 2% cap every year versus seeking alternative options and making cuts as needed?
Yeah, so I mentioned already that I have significant budget management experience. I work for this $20 billion global company, and we have a $1.5 billion budget. I myself manage personally a $20 million budget annually. And in the when you think about, automatically adding to the base, that's just something that I don't do every year. And similarly, before I looked to raise taxes to the 2% cap kind of automatically to fund additional priorities, I would prefer to take a holistic look at the budget, open up the hood, take a look at what our priorities are, and see whether or not we can be more efficient and effective with the dollars that we have and spend them more impactfully based on the new and evolving priorities. So that said, I would be efficient and effective with the dollars that we already have in the base. If it weren't possible to achieve our priorities without adding to the base, then as a board member, I would look to consider whether or not we needed to recommend a raising of the taxes to the 2% cap. Thanks.
Thank you. The next person to answer this question will be Mr. Horowitz, and I'll repeat the question for you. Over 60% of Moorstonians' tax bill goes to fund the schools. What experience do you have managing a budget? And how do you feel about tax increases and going to the 2% cap every year versus seeking alternative options and making cuts as needed?
My background as an accountant, I've done multi-billion-dollar budgets for Fortune 500 companies. I'm in a healthcare industry right now where my multi-million-dollar business is completely private pay funded. So as I have to worry about my labor force and taking care of them, I also have to be a fiduciary of the clientele of my patients and families that I'm working with, because they're going to bear the brunt of it. I don't want to meet that 2% threshold and do everything we can. What other ways can we leverage managers in our superintendents and Board of Education offices that have access or knowledge on getting other state funding or resources to free money that might be out there to help alleviate that concern? Because the question is going to be, what do we cut? And I don't think that there's anything that we really want to cut out of our tremendous school district here, because there are so many wonderful benefits to our students. So it will take going line by line by line to see how can we make it better and try and avoid that 2% cut match.
Thank you. Next will be Mrs. Makopoulos. Repeat the question just so you have it fresh in your mind. Over 60% of our tax bill goes to fund the schools. What experience do you have managing a budget? And how do you feel about tax increases and going to the 2% cap every year versus seeking alternative options and making cuts as needed?
So I do have significant experience managing multi-million-dollar budgets. I always kind of would say every year my budget would get cut at work, but I still had to meet my goals. So, I sort of go back to this idea that when the budget is the financial description of the roadmap of the district. So having really well-designed district goals that are measurable really helps us align the budget in a way that we feel good that every dollar is being spent in the way that we want it to be spent. So I 100% agree with the ideas about really lifting the hood, digging in, and understanding where we can gain efficiencies. I prefer not to to increase taxes. I think what we need to try and do is generate more revenue, push for more state aid, do grant writing, advocate for more of the American Rescue Plan money, which I believe the town has rights to. Look for more opportunities to be efficient with shared services and find ways to be more efficient with technology.
Thank you. Mrs. Thomas, I'll repeat the question for you as well. Over 60% of our budget, our tax bill goes to fund, I'm sorry, for 60% of our tax bill goes to fund the schools. What experience do you have managing a budget? How do you feel about tax increases and going to the 2% cap each year versus seeking alternative options and making cuts as needed?
I too manage a multi-million-dollar budget, and I would certainly not look to increasing the 2% cap just by default every year. I would look for areas where savings can be made, the low-hanging fruit, where there would be no or minimal impact to what's in the best interest of our students if cut or done away with. The opportunities must be looked for very thoroughly and comprehensively, as the other candidates have said, examining the implications prior to removing. A guiding principle that I have adhered to when developing budgets and looking at streamlining is ensuring that the costs are reasonable and necessary. Our incoming superintendent will have to be able to support this fundamental premise in justifying the addition and corresponding increases, or in the instance of removal, corresponding implications to that. Additionally, the district should examine and closely pursue additional opportunities that save and also increase revenue.
Thank you. I'm going to pose the same question to Mr. Bustigan. Do you need me to repeat it for you, or?
That's okay. I won't make you do that again.
I'm happy to repeat it for each person, but maybe by now you know what the drill
That's
is.
okay. The experience I have in managing a budget goes back to my family business at Quickie Manufacturing. That was a $250 million business. We had customers that were doing $100 million with on their own, like the Home Depot or Lowe's. And we had to reassess the budget on a quarterly basis and then submit a final budget on an annual basis. And when it came to spending or cutting, you had to assess as a team what's working, what's not working. And you have to be able to take off your personal opinion hat sometime and answer that question honestly and say, what is really working here? Let's spend more money on that. And if something isn't working, you have to be able to say, even if it was a pet project of yours that just isn't working out, you have to be able to say so, own up to it, and perhaps make some cuts. It doesn't mean you always have to also hit, by the way, the 2.5%. You could just slow that curve. It doesn't mean that every single year you've got to hit it. It can be slowed and not necessarily eliminated. There's no reason to do that either. It just has to be spent wisely. And like I said earlier, it all comes down to results.
Thank you. And then Mrs. Burns, you'll be the last one for this question. Would you like me to repeat it or are you set?
No, I think I'm okay. Thanks. The reality is that our schools bring people here. They keep our property values high. Our first priority should always be to look line by line at the budget and see if we can work with what we have. Going to the 2% cap, which in fact is a very rare occurrence actually in our district, and looking for alternative ways to raise revenue are not mutually exclusive things. Costs go up every year, and we are faced with difficult decisions of a tax increase versus making cuts. That is the unfortunate reality. If we do spend multiple years without raising taxes at all, then the bottom line is we will continue to be in a hole and we will continue to have to make these very difficult decisions. But of course, no one wants their taxes to go up. I own a home here. I don't want my taxes to go up. I think that can be said for probably everyone here. But it is something that we really, truly need to consider, not just for the year that we are facing, but for the years going forward.
Thank you. Now, I think I've gotten everybody on that question. So we'll move on to the last of the pre-submitted questions. And we are actually a little bit behind schedule. So we will have time possibly for a couple of live questions. All right. There are concerns that critical race theory divides people into the oppressors and the oppressed. What do you feel is the most effective way for our schools to teach the full history of our nation, good and bad, in a manner that allows room for growth and helps build a more united town and country? And this will go first to Mr. Horowitz.
So I'm a numbers guy. I tell my staff all the time, follow the numbers, follow the money. So when we call it CRT, it's a little misleading because of how we're getting marketed to in our news. CRT is not taught in our school district. And I don't want to waste the time of our superintendent to show us where we're not teaching it. But I do think that we have to very thoughtfully and accurately teach history. Slavery and racial issues are certainly a very prominent part of our past. And teaching race doesn't mean that people haven't worked hard to get to where they are now, but certainly that we need to be cognizant of where we come from to make sure that we don't go back there. And it is very pertinent, as we've seen over the last few years, where we shouldn't have to be talking about race in 2021. We've seen it a little bit too prominently in the news that it is a bigger problem than we realize nationally. I've always prided myself being around diverse people, working in a diverse environment, and growing up in diverse neighborhoods. And it is something that is top of mind to be mindful of now in our teaching historically accurately.
Thank you. Mrs. Makopoulos, I'll repeat the question for you. There are concerns that critical race theory divides people into the oppressors and the oppressed. What do you feel is the most effective way for our schools to teach the full history of our nation, both the good and the bad, in a manner that allows room for growth and helps build a more united town and country?
I think that we do need to present a full and complete history of our country to all of our students. I think we need to address all of the different cultural perspectives, acknowledge people who've been marginalized, acknowledge all the great things that have happened, and do it in the context of our history and our core curriculum within history, language arts. Our country isn't perfect, and we need to learn about all those cultural differences and perspectives so that we can teach our children, all of them, to learn from our history, respect each other, and raise each other up.
Thank you. I didn't have to hold up the card that time.
I'm trying to give you some time back.
All right, Mrs. Thomas, there's concerns that critical race theory divides people into the oppressors and the oppressed. What do you feel is the most effective way for our schools to teach the full history of our nation, good and bad, in a manner that allows room for growth and helps build a more united town and country?
I would also have to say that critical race theory is a social construct. There has been much that has been misrepresented regarding critical race theory. Critical race theory is not something that is taught in pre-K 12 in the United States. And therefore, I don't believe that it should be entered into the dialogue and used. However, I do feel that there is the opportunity for us to ensure that culturally relevant teaching takes place in our schools, that our curriculum includes a correct historical perspective of all populations, of all groups, to ensure that as students matriculate through school, that they understand the contributions that all groups have made. And the curriculum should be infused with this. It should not be isolated to any one particular course, but it is something that should be taught across the spectrum of the curriculum.
Thank you. I believe Mr. Bustigan is going next on this. Would you like me to repeat the question?
No, that's okay. I think that last point that you just made is an excellent one, that, making sure that everybody who contributes to this country, that it's brought to the forefront and that that's taught. I know that's what I was taught. I came away from my experience of learning at Moorestown, learning about the full diverse background of this country, everything. And I know when I talk to my daughters at the dinner table, what they learn in school today, and I hear them telling me what they're learning, they're hearing about all different cultures, contributions to this country, from all backgrounds, and that's the way it should be. I think the simple answer to the question is, if it's the truth and it's historically accurate, it ought to be taught. And there's good and bad in any country, in any civilization. I think far more good than bad in this country, but of course there's going to be bad and good, and both are taught and have been taught consistently. And I don't think that's ever changed here in Moorestown, and it ought to remain that way.
When you finish ahead of the time, I have a hard time turning off the timer. All right. Mrs. Burns, what do you feel is the most effective way for our schools to teach the full history of our nation, good and bad?
So I will say first, as others have said, critical race theory has sadly just been used as a way, I think, to further divide our country. It's a graduate level class, came about in law school. It is not something that would ever be appropriate in a K through 12 curriculum. However, if you're asking if I believe the history should be taught the way that it actually happened without any missing parts, then I can tell you I agree with that. But to be clear, that is not what critical race theory is. Teaching history the way it actually happened, teaching the good and the bad, will in of itself, I think, bring our community together. And I feel like it will help our students realize that there is just so much diversity out there to be learned about, to be explored, and to be celebrated.
Thank you. All right, Mrs. Follows Macaluso.
Yeah. So I agree wholeheartedly that teaching our full history is important. CRT, as others have mentioned, is not part of our K through 12 curriculum. It's a legal theory that's taught in law school, and I'm intimately familiar with it. But I just want to note that in my understanding, CRT seems to often be conflated with DEI, which is and should be part of the state mandated curriculum. It's so important for our children to, like I said previously, not just tolerate diversity, but embrace diversity, and for our school system to foster an inclusive community within the four walls of the school and within the community itself. And I think there is so much value in having a robust curriculum around inclusivity and in teaching our children how to practice inclusive behaviors so that they can not just be successful at MTPS, but also be successful in the workplace and the world. It is a capability and a muscle that sometimes we have to learn to build. And I think it's very valuable, and I recognize why it's part of the state mandated curriculum.
Thank you so much. So that concludes all the questions that were submitted in advance. I'm not exactly sure how it got to be 8:20 already. We were hoping to allow some live questions to be submitted. We obviously won't have time to answer those if that happens, but I'd still like to invite Mr. Airy, who's our tech support guy, to open up the chat so that if people have questions that weren't addressed yet, we can capture them in writing and share them with the candidates for their consideration as they round out their campaigns and as they either serve on the board or attend board meetings as citizens. So the chat's open. You may submit questions. We will save the questions from the chat and share them with the candidates after the forum. But since we really only have about 10 or 11 minutes left and we committed to completing this by the 8:30 timeframe, what I'd like to do is open it up for the closing comments. And since Mrs. Follows was the last to speak, for the first closing comment, I would like to go then to Mr. Horwitz. Give you an opportunity to give about 2 minutes to summarize why folks should vote for you.
All right, going first, twice in a row. Here we go. Thank you so much for hosting this event tonight. I greatly appreciate it. I hope we've been able to meet all of your expectations and earn your trust. My first and foremost barometer for every decision which to measure is going to be, is this beneficial to our children's learning? At work, I say, are we following our mission, vision, values? And here I know it's our mission, vision, goals, but we do have to be holding true to our values. And that's going to be most importantly, changing the tone. And where we have a third of our board that is turning over this year, we're going to have to bring the appropriate tone to be able to work effectively together. And with that, we're going to have to figure out a way to communicate effectively back to the community and to the public. I've said it before that I think the most important thing that is at issue is getting that leader in place, the superintendent, and holding them accountable so that they can lead our district for many years, just not 4 or 5. In 2016, we had a headline that said, school district can't keep superintendents. And here we are 5 years later, repeating the same old circle. And I think it's our tone that drove people out of town, right or wrong. You know, we all have our different opinions. But as we've spoken about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we certainly need to be treating each other equitably and including everybody. If we're going to help foster global citizens out of our children, you know, some of that is going to be including diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm having trainings on that at work, and so are all my staff. So if we think our kids aren't going to have it later, you're mistaken. It's going to help prepare them for the real world. Teachers negotiations we've talked about is going to be very important. And also there's so many topics we didn't address, like dress code, problems that have been going on for 12 years came up at the meeting the other day, and we certainly have to bring the accountability with the new flavor that's going to be coming to the board and bringing that back out to everyone. And I hope to bring my number-focused accounting, big business background to bring that accountability to the board. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Mrs. Makopoulos, would you like to do your closing comments?
Thank you, Karen. First, I just want to say thank you to all of the other candidates here tonight. It was really great to hear everybody's responses to the questions. And, you know, we don't all know each other, so it's really good to hear there's a lot more similarities in what we want for this district than differences. And I think it was said earlier that it's our responsibility as parents, as board members, that we want to be for the community. It's important to have a positive tone and approach and be able to work together. So I thoroughly enjoyed listening to everybody talk tonight. And I thank you for all the time and commitment this has taken, because I know it's a lot. And I want to thank everybody on the Zoom. I almost said phone, showing my age. Just thank you all for bringing your questions, listening. I hope this has given you a lot to consider when you think about who you're going to vote for. As you've seen through my personal and professional experience, I really believe in well-defined, measurable objectives and leadership. I think when we have measurable objectives, we can hold everyone accountable to making sure that we are delivering for our students and our children. As a member of the BOE, I will leverage my skill set as an objective, measured thinker with a successful career leading teams and companies to deliver results. I will work collaboratively with all of you, all the stakeholders, to provide a well-rounded, challenging, and relevant education that allows every child in Moorestown to be successful in the way that it's what success means for them, whether it's academic, athletics, the arts, technology, if it's functional, occupational, or vocational. We should be able to meet the needs and develop all of these children. And with under 4,000 students and a passion and commitment from this town, which has been articulated in a few different ways tonight, I believe we have the ability to know every student by name, strength, and need, and help them achieve at their best ability. I hope you will let me advocate for you, for your students, and for your children. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Thomas, closing comments.
I would also like to thank all of the participants for taking the time this evening to inform themselves and also their vote, and also the other candidates. This is something that I believe all of us feel very strongly about, being a service to our community and ensuring that our students have the best possible education that this district has to offer. An education that would allow them to go on and meet with success in whatever way that looks for them. I feel that I have unique qualifications and would be equipped to be a tremendous asset to this board as it moves forward in providing the resources to this district and ensuring the leadership that will allow us to remain on the trajectory towards excellence, and giving birth to the next leaders, the next entrepreneurs, the next scholars that this district has to offer the world. In closing, I'd like to say that I feel that my life work speaks for me. It has been centered around advocating for children of all different backgrounds and origins, ensuring that each has had the opportunity to realize their highest potential and meet with success. And you can be assured that with every issue or decision that I would give voice to, it would at its center have the best interest of each child in our district. It would be my honor to join this amazing board of education and to serve our community, district, and most importantly, our children. I hope that based upon what you've been provided with this evening, that you will consider a vote for me. And I know that there were many questions that did not get answered this evening, but I would also like to offer my email address in just soliciting any engagement beyond tonight. So please feel free to contact me. My email should be in the chat box. I'm hoping that it appeared, but if it did not, it's bdt4boe@gmail.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I don't know that the voters can see the chat. I think only the panelists can. So if anyone else wants to share their email, please do it verbally. Okay, next person to close out will be Mr. Bustigan.
Thank you, Karen, and everybody vying for the position on the board. Thanks for your time and patience during this whole process. It does take a lot. I am also very pleased to hear that there's a tremendous amount of common ground, more than I expected, coming out of everybody here tonight. So that's extremely encouraging, because that's what is going to take is teamwork and working together for a common goal. I would say again that my qualifications, my theme for this campaign is one voice. I'll always be on the lookout of what is absolutely best, top of mind for the kids. But also I use the term one voice because I feel as though you hear about the children, you hear about the students, and you hear about the schools, but the parents also, I believe, deserve an equal and transparent voice in this process. And even though I'm vying for one of 9 seats, I'm one of 9 people if I win that board seat. And I feel like the parents' voice ought to be a de facto 10th seat. There ought to be a voice for the parents in the community where they feel they are being heard. And we don't ever want to have the community feel like a small group, including myself. My opinion alone shouldn't be the decision making factor that alone decides something for 4,000 people, 4,000 students, 5,000 families. It shouldn't be that way. It should be equal voices all speaking together and feeling as though they are being heard and responded to. And again, I'm a results-driven individual. So when it comes to budgets, when it comes to the outcome of our education and curriculum, my politics and personal opinions on things shouldn't matter so much as outcomes and the results of our curriculum and how our kids are doing. That is all. Hope to get your vote, and everyone have a nice night. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mrs. Burns.
Asking these hard questions and having these discussions is what makes Moorestown a great place to live. As a district, we are facing difficult issues: new superintendent, teacher contract negotiations, and adapting to the changes the pandemic has forced upon us. People move to Moorestown for our schools, and that is why our property values are so high. My work on the planning board and EDAC helps me see more fully the ways in which the Board of Education decisions impact our entire town. I am committed to following the science to keep our children and employees safe and in school. I want the district to provide a bigger picture to our students of what success looks like. I want us to truly celebrate all of our students, regardless of what path they take to success, when they take it, or how long it takes them to walk it. I want to help our district embrace inclusion as a philosophy that touches every aspect of the educational experience, from the classroom to the basketball court and to the stage. I want to help our district find real ways to truly encourage diversity and make it a reality. We are so fortunate to have passionate parents, dedicated staff, and committed volunteers. And on the board, I will work to harness the skills and energy of these 3 groups. I know we can continue to offer an excellent education and provide our students with the tools they need to be well-rounded global citizens. But to achieve those goals, we need to work together, find compromise, maintain respect and civility, and keep the best interests of our students as the focus of every decision we make. Regaining the trust of the community must be a priority, and I believe that will come with more effective communication and more opportunities for parental engagement. I'm asking for your vote tonight because I believe my skills, experience, and proven investment in this town will bring something unique to the board that is needed in these uncertain times. Thank you to everyone who joined us tonight and presented questions, and for being so engaged in this process.
Thank you. Now, if I've done my math right, we have 1 person left. This is Follows Macaluso.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thank you to the organizers of the event. I couldn't agree more that it's been such a success, and I've really enjoyed having the opportunity to share more about myself. I also feel so fortunate to be part of this Moorestown community. You know, I've been lucky enough to spend time with so many parents and their children through coaching, scouts, volunteering, and it's truly been a joy watching the kids grow up kind of before my eyes. Now that my girls are getting a little older, I know that joining the board is the best way that I can continue to support our community and, more importantly, our children. It was challenging, but such an honor to speak to so many parents over the past year and hear about your concerns about the school and your hopes for your children. It was a difficult year of change, but I know I'm a change lover. There's going to continue to be change. The world's changing, our district's changing, it's inevitable. And we really need to continuously evolve to adapt to this ever-changing environment. And that's what you'll really get with me. A vote for me is truly a vote for change. If you want the status quo, quite frankly, I might not be your candidate. I mentioned that I want to see increased transparency, increased proactivity in planning and decision making. I want to see us foster a culture of inclusion, not just in our schools, but amongst the parent community. I want to see the Board of Education meaningfully deliberate on important issues, have a dialogue, and hear from diverse voices. I myself am a diverse voice, and I bring the skills and experiences to the table that are going to complement the other folks that are already around the Board of Education table. I said it before, and I can't emphasize it enough. Diverse teams are stronger. They're more innovative. They're more successful. They outperform teams without diversity that often stagnate, get to complacency and groupthink. So please vote for me if you want change. I am all in for our kids, for our community. I'll bring my skills, my capabilities, my passion, my energy, my enthusiasm, and my creativity to work hard for all of us. Thank you.
I want to thank all of you. Somebody put a question in the chat that asked how many people dialed in. The highest number that I noticed was 260. It could have been higher at some point when I was keeping time or whatever, but I think that's fantastic. I know when we hold these live, we sometimes only get 30, 40 people in the room. So thank you, voters, for dialing in. This whole session has been recorded. So if you missed part of it, or if you have friends that didn't get to dial in, we will be saving this and finding a way to share this with you. So watch your various news sources. I'll find a way to get the word out to where we're sharing this. I really want to thank all of these candidates for running. You are all wonderful citizens of our community. It was a pleasure getting to know you. Many of you I've never met before. I really want to thank Home and School for hosting the event, Megan Del Calo. I want to thank Rochelle Rabineau and Jonathan Leith for helping us make sure that this is a fair and balanced event. And I especially want to thank Jeff Ayers from MTPS for providing all the tech support for the Zoom event. So don't forget to vote on Tuesday, November 2nd. And everybody have a wonderful night. We will pass the unasked questions on to the candidates, and we're grateful to all involved. Thanks so much. Bye all.
Bye. Good night.
Okay, good night.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
I'm going to stay on until I know from Jeff that he was able to save the chat. Did anybody see a number any higher than 260?
Can we see the number, Karen?
I noticed it where the chat box is. Right now it says, next to the left of that says participants. It's dropping down. It says 109, and as people hang up, can you see that?
Yeah.
I saw 286 at one point. This is Megan.
286, great.
Yeah, and I did get a couple emails throughout the whole thing that there was an issue with somebody. So there was a couple who were getting redirected through Facebook, but I think that got worked out maybe mid-call. So that may have been right when it got worked out, but.
Okay.
Karen, how can we make sure that the people get all our emails? I know I didn't want to just jump in while people were talking.
So I don't have a master list of who dialed in, but I'm going to use all the same resources we use to promote it. We're going to use to share the word that the event was recorded and where they can find the recording. And in that message, I'm happy to include all of your email addresses.
That's fine with me.
Does that work?
Yeah.
The other thing is, Jeff may know a better way, like if there's a participant list and when they logged in, if there's a way to send a message to all participants through
Maybe.
Zoom, you know?
That's a
Yeah,
good
Jeff-
question. I'm not 100% sure, but I can look into
Okay.
that tomorrow.
Thank you, Jeff.
Sure.
Karen, I'm sorry, one last question. People have gone in between using like my Board of Ed email and my personal email. So do you want us to just email you, just like confirm which email address we want to be used so that you have that from us, or?
That would be perfect.
Okay.
If you
Okay.
send me an email with your preferred email address, because I think I might have been writing to some of you on your own personal emails.
Yeah, that's fine. It's just easier to track them in the BOE specific email. Otherwise, they'll get lost in a cloud of other things.
Right. All right. It looks like we still have 59 participants possibly listening in, or they've gone off to fix a bowl of ice cream and didn't come back. I think you all did a fabulous job. Honestly, I don't know how we got off schedule because I thought we were ahead of schedule for a while. I think maybe the reading of the questions takes longer than I accounted for when I built the schedule. So nobody wound up on the hot seat with a live question. So
This is great.
yeah.
It was great.
So-
Thank you for it and organizing it.
Oh, thank you all for running, really from the bottom of my heart. It takes so much courage to do what you're doing, especially in the midst of a global pandemic and all that comes with that. So
How many years, Karen, have you guys hosted this? Do you know?
either the third or the fourth year.
I think it's the fourth year.
Is
Because
it?
Karen and I have been doing this for what, 4 years now?
You know, I think you might be right, Rochelle. It might be the fourth year.
Yeah, it's the fourth year.
Starting in 2022, we're going to shift the responsibility, not actually the soldiers doing it though, but we're going to shift the responsibility from More Unity to an organization called Braver Angels that Rochelle and I are co-leading. Braver Angels is a group that helps people communicate across the political divide, and it's made up of equal numbers of red and blue, and independents are welcome too. And More Unity is going to be focusing more on sort of social and cultural issues that divide us and step a little bit away from the political. So you'll still see me and Rochelle if you run again. But we're going to be taking it over as Braver Angels. And I'll also send you all an email to ask for feedback on how things went and what recommendations for improvement you have. You know, I don't want to bore, if there's still participants on the line, I don't want to bore them or have this is going to become part of the recording. But we will be interested in your feedback and whether there's things we can do to improve it for the next time around.
Great.
Jeff, if you're still on the line, when you save this recording, can you edit this last part out?
I don't know.
Okay. Maybe we should